Alright, this time, and now it's the Mario RPG games. I actually was with these games from start to finish. Although it did take me a bit longer to get into the Mario and Luigi games than the Paper Mario games or the original Super Mario RPG, but for the most part, I do have a lot of nostalgia for those, so I won't say my feelings in here won't have some blindness. But I do have some opinions that will definitely split from the norms. So, to start off, original Super Mario RPG. It's a pretty good game, everyone will agree on that one. But I do feel it's kinda overrated. Not gonna lie. And I've played both the original and the remake. Speaking of remakes, by the way, I'll touch on the remakes and say which one I like better, but I'm not gonna rank them individually. Anyways, it did have some creative bits to it as far as like the mechanics, since it did introduce action prompts and increasing or reducing damage, though they were very basic in comparison to Paper Mario. But to be fair, it was the first game, that's fine. The story was decent. Better than your average Mario game, but paled in comparison to what it was taking direct inspiration was Squaresoft games. And it kind of did feel like Diet Final Fantasy. That's not necessarily a bad thing either. And I know everybody's probably gonna already hitting the stop button because of the next thing I'm about to say is I don't understand why everybody has a boner for Geno. He ain't that great. I'll grant you his buff attack ability can make Mario absolutely shred enemies, but as him alone, it's just, I don't see it. Every time I've done a playthrough, I always end up using Mario, Bowser, and Peach for the entire thing. Or, the entire thing when you get them, that is. There's a decent number of secrets to find, decent music. Visuals were good for their time, though they aged very badly. Even for their time. Just, I don't know. I've seen the other SNES games look better. That one just always looked kind of grainy. The remake did a great job touching up on that. I do wish it hadn't have been full price because it was a pretty basic, just mostly the same game but with better graphics than a few quality of life improvements. They did make it a bit easier for better or worse, even if you don't use the new team attack, which I do feel is a bit unnecessary. The game was fairly challenging, but it wasn't as hard as, say, Final Fantasy games or Chrono Trigger, or a lot of even modern RPGs. Probably still the hardest of the Mario RPGs, though. But again, apart from some tough boss fights, it's not too big of a deal. I fully recommend going with the remake on this one if you haven't played it before. I'm just gonna say it's a B tier. Top B, but still a B tier. Now, Paper Mario 1. This was the one that really got me into the Mario RPGs. They heavily expanded on the button prompts. The story did take a bit of a backseat, I'll admit, because it was more or less just the standard Mario story with a few things attached on, but they made up for it in the characters and the quirky partners you get, which all have quite unique movesets. And that, to me, is what set this one apart over, say, Super Mario RPG. It had a great soundtrack. It looked decent for an N64 game, even if it didn't hold up to its sequel at all. I honestly wish they had remade this instead of Thousand Year Door, because I do think it needs it more, especially with that performance. But you can play on the NSO as well as the old eShops if you have already bought one before they went down or have a hat console. But I'm gonna say that's an A tier. Now, its sequel, I absolutely love this game. I fully agree with most people on that. It's not faultless like a lot of people think. It's probably one of the easiest ones. The only time it's really particularly challenging was in the final boss in the Pit of 100 Trials. which is optional. But the rest of it, the only real difficulty for the most part is just trying to figure out some of the weird environmental puzzles, especially the ones that make you use the wind spirit. It looked amazing for its time. Definitely a huge step up from 64. Even better soundtrack. The partner characters even better. Like, I think everybody remembers Goombella at the very least. Story was a hell of a lot better than its predecessor and felt like a proper story instead of more or less just the Mario motions with bells and whistles attached to it. Definite S tier. I just wish it had been a bit more challenging, but honestly, that's the only complaint I can make for it. If you want to argue that's overrated, that's fine, I'll accept that, but I still say it's an S tier game, and probably the best in the series. Definitely the best of the Paper Marios, but I'd say the best Mario RPG all overall. Next was the Mario and Luigi series. I did try this one once, the first time when I was young. I will admit, I got turned off a bit because it was hard for me to get the button prompts right. Mostly because of how the GBA's controller is. Well, how the GBA is. But that's just me as a dumb kid. Having replayed that later on, I absolutely came to love it. I won't say it's the best of the Mario and Luigi series, but it was a strong start. It had decent music and visuals for a GBA game. It made the most of the console. It was quite stylish with even with its technical limitations. There's a few nice mini games. The story wasn't as decent as Thousand Year Door, but still better than, average Mario game. As far as the remake goes, I do think I prefer the original. While the remake looks better technically, I prefer the aesthetics of the original, especially with the music. Would have been nice if they had given it both the original and new soundtracks like they did the Super Mario RPG one. Which, by the way, I'm thankful that Super Mario RPG did that, because the remake's soundtracks is kinda ass. Thankfully, Mario Luigi's remake is pretty good, though just inferior to the original to me. The Bowser's Minions definitely has some controversy to it. I'm open to new content, and I thought it was a good idea, but executed rather poorly. And it's more grind than it is strategy, since it feels more like a mobile game, and that's probably where it should have been. But, again, it's not a bad add-on. I prefer the original, but you can't go wrong with the remake. It's definitely an A tier. I think I do prefer Paper Mario a bit more, though. Now, where I'm really going to break with opinions and people that didn't like Partners in Time, I absolutely love that one. Even with the obnoxious crying babies. Yeah, I said it. Partner in Time is the best of the Mario and Luigi series, and it's the one that got me back into it, because I did play this and finish it before I had gone back and replayed Superstar Saga. I truly wish they had remade this one, but kind of hard to justify that when I make my comments about the Inside Story remake, which I'll get into in a bit. The story was surprisingly dark at times. Decent music, although the basic battle music kind of sucked. That's my main complaint for it. The battle item system, hit or miss. It did make the combat a bit more tedious and set the precedent for Mario and Luigi combat to be more time-consuming than it should have been. It was definitely easier than the original, though most of the original's difficulty to me was that obnoxious final boss, which is probably the hardest point in the entire Mario RPG series. But there were some tough fights, even with the items. Honestly, I think I put this on par with 64, maybe a little bit better because I do like that dark story. So, yeah, I have a bit more nostalgia for 64, but I think Partners in Time was the better game. Now we go to another divisive game, Super Paper Mario. I think this one gets treated unfairly. It was pretty creative with the jumping between 2D and 3D, and it was kind of interesting the way they blended RPG mechanics with platformer mechanics. It was one of the only other games where Bowser is a controllable character. Also a pretty dark story, and supposedly this is the one that made Nintendo take, or someone in Nintendo take notice of that and kind of be like, hey, tone that down, which I don't know if this is true or not. That's the rumor, but if so, I could believe it, because that story did get a bit even darker than Partners in Time. I don't like the weird spritey looking characters, or that's not the right word. They kind of look like stick figure-y characters, actually, that aren't the direct Mario characters. But other than that, visually it looked decent. A bit washed out with the colors compared to Thousand Year Door, but it wasn't bad. Once again, another great soundtrack. I was kind of disappointed as well that even though you could play as 4 different characters, that the partner system was gone. And the fact that it had dropped the standard RPG mechanics, but as a whole it held up pretty well. Not quite as good as RPG, but on its own, it's pretty good. Maybe a bit disappointing for Paper Mario fans, but again, I really feel like it's treated unfairly. Now we come to Bowser's Inside Story, and I always hear people harping on how this is the best of the Mario and Luigi games, and I have a hard disagree on that one. It's still good, don't get me wrong, but it ain't S tier material, I can say that. Playing as Bowser was great, and that power trip, and you can actually just demolish things half the time. The problem is when you're playing as Mario and Luigi, ironically enough. Going around in Turtle's insides for half the game, not particularly fun. Nor were the amount of minigames you have to do. That shit was atrocious. Not to mention, it's probably one of the shortest in the entire series. The soundtrack was also kind of bleh, and that's when the soundtrack for the series started going downhill. I did not like the original DS's aesthetics, but that's kind of an odd preference for me. Now, as far as the remake goes, this time I will say the remake is the better of the two, even though the frame rate, weirdly enough, dropped down to 60 and dropped the 3D effect. Which also begged the question, why did we even need a remake of this in the first place? Like, they could have easily just thrown it up on the eShop. The system was already backwards compatible. And not only that, again, if you're going to drop the 3D, why did you bother? It's not like the game was expensive at the time. But there are enough improvements to warrant it. There are some balance changes, like with the Superstar Saga, for better or worse. Oh yes, and the Bowser Jr. Minion mode. Basically the same as the first, but I think it was improved a little bit. There were some new mechanics added in, and there's actually a bit of a storyline, and it gives some more character to the Koopalings and Bowser Jr. I enjoyed that for what it was, though I do wish they had made it less grindy and more tactical. But that's not a bad package. Overall, I would say this is also a B tier, inferior to Super, but it is what it is. Now, for another game that I do think it's treated a little unfairly is Sticker Star. Now, hear me out. I'm not going to say the game is good. And I fully understand people being disappointed by it. Believe me, I was too. But it does have some good points. There are some interesting boss fights, like the giant blooper. And I will give them credit for trying something different, even if it didn't work out. It looked fairly decent for a 3DS game, transferring the series to the 3DS. On the downside, though, the story suffered immensely, and this is like the most... Actually, this is the second most going through the motion story there was. And the environments also going through the motions. Soundtrack was pretty okay, though. But again, the main problem, besides the story and lack of charm, that the series was known for is the battle mechanics. They completely ditched the RPGs, so the only thing you get from battles is a few coins and maybe a sticker. The problem is to fight, you have to use said stickers, so oftentimes they're counterproductive, unless you're collecting. But given the fact that the game is short, also works to its favor, so it doesn't completely wear you out by the time it's done. Another complaint I have is the thing puzzles. They ain't so great. And they're not particularly fun to use either, or find. So, yeah, there were more than a few times I had to look up a guide on that one, but again, I don't think it's terrible. I think it's worth a playthrough. I wouldn't recommend paying more than $20 for it. 20, $30 for it. Better yet, if you got a hack 3DS, just use that. But it's worth a playthrough. I'm gonna just say it's a C tier. It's not terrible. It's not particularly good, but it isn't bad. It's just okay. Now, we go for Dream Team. A lot of people say this is the downfall of the series, but I disagree. It's inferior to its predecessors. It gets dragged out longer than it needed to be. But the 3D effects were quite nice. Some of the moves were interesting. The soundtrack was pretty alright. The story was a step back, but it wasn't going through the motions per se quite yet. Now, I will say the one thing that was dumb about it was the fact those block characters. What were they thinking with that one? Ugh. But yeah, it did, again, it also being the fact that it was dragged out is the fact that a lot of the areas you had to go through both a dream phase and a real world phase. Made it a bit of a slog at times, but it is what it is. I would say it's probably a low B. It's still good. It definitely started slipping, but it's still good. Now, what I would call the downfall is the final sequel, Paper Jam. Oh boy, this is a slap in the face to pretty much all Paper Mario fans, because hey, here's your Paper Mario RPG. Not really. The soundtrack was terrible. What really pissed me off is there is a nice remix of the original Mario & Luigi's battle theme, but as soon as you get to Paper Mario, they yank that away and replace it with the worst battle theme in the entire series. And the boss battles aren't much better. But if you want to talk about going through the motions, this one's it. Like, apart from the premise of paper characters leaking into the quote-unquote real world, which they did not do enough with. That could have been interesting, but they just didn't do enough with it. Other than that, it's just going through the motions. And man, does the castle phase drag out. And most of it's just fighting Bowser and the Koopalings, just trying to rescue the princess. Princess is. Ooh, that's a plot twist. Ugh, D tier on that one. It's not unplayable. It's not bad, but it is the definition of mediocrity. Like, there's nothing really. There's just nothing special about it. And it completely lacks charm. I would say only play it if you just want to play it for the sake of playing through the rest of the series and seeing how I guess it ends. But other than that, yeah, don't feel you're not missing anything if you don't. I don't hate the game, but yeah, that's a disappointment. Now, Color Splash, a lot of people passed up on because it was more sticker star, but I feel that did the game a disservice. Yes, it has the sticker stars issue of having to use items for combat and it being counterproductive if you don't get items back. But at least you do upgrade your paint count by battles, so it's not there. I guess there is some sort of experience system in it, so it's not as counterproductive as Sticker Star was. More importantly, the writing was a hell of a lot better. They brought back the charm that the older games are known for, and that's a definite plus. The environments were also a little bit less generic, though you could see certain tropes, Mario tropes in them, but it felt like it was headed in the right direction, or at the very least, it's what Sticker Star should have been. I really enjoyed playing it, just for the charm alone. And again, good. The writing was good. Environments are fun to explore. I would say that's between Dream Team and Inside Story, maybe. Unfortunately, it's still locked to the Wii U, so unless you have said console, or I guess an emulator to run it well enough, I can't say to go out and get one just for that, but if you got one, give it a play. It's really not bad. Now, Battle Kingdom was an interesting one. That came out and surprised everyone. I was especially surprised because guess what? I don't like the Rayman series. I don't care for it, and I hate Rabbids. Plus, being made by Ubisoft, that was just screaming for trouble. But, weirdly enough, they gave us an XCOM clone. Albeit very simple, for better or worse. Though I guess not dealing with the RNG mechanics as heavily. You either get a 50% chance to hit, you're guaranteed to hit, or you miss. It's simple. And you don't have to deal with like 99% and then missing. Despite the fact that it has rabbits in it, it had a surprising amount of charm. I don't like the fact that you're forced to use Mario and a rabbit at all times. So if you don't want to use the rabbits, guess what? You have to use at least one. Though to be fair, the correct one to use is Rabbid Peach because she's the only healer on the team. So leaving the other spot to another rabbit if you wish, but I would recommend going with the human on that one because guess what? Your main sniper, which is Luigi, is a human. Unfortunately, you can't use your sniper or Peach, who's a shotgun user, on the same team, so pick your poison. The environment's kind of bland, but it was a pretty crazy romp. Story went some places I didn't expect it to, and it didn't make me hate the rabbits for once, which is an achievement on its own. The music was a bit bland, but it is what it is. The DLC was also a nice surprise, since I was a bit worried that you were forced to use the same 3 characters for the entirety of it, but hey, it worked out quite well. And hey, Cranky Kong's Giga Chad. Combat system, again, simple but effective. It had a decent amount of challenge. Not too heavily that it would prevent most people from finishing the story mode, but the optional challenge stages were pretty tough. I'm going to just say this one is an A. Not quite as good as the other A titles, but man, quite an accomplishment what they did with that game, I'm not going to lie. Origami Kingdom was an interesting case. It's definitely the best of the modern Paper Mario games. But it still had some of the problems of it as well, since there's no experience system. Thankfully, battles aren't completely counterproductive, since you don't lose anything with fights apart from taking damage. But the problem is the combat just gets really boring. As King Endless Flames will call it, the circle jerk. Now, thankfully the boss fights, on the other hand, they inverted it. So instead of being in the middle of a circle and changing it to work your way outward, you start in outward and work your way inward. And there's some interesting puzzles that go along with the boss fights, plus most of the boss themes kind of slap. Which is another thing, the music was pretty good. Good music, good visuals, good writing. Probably better than Color Splash in that regard, and just some nice character interaction. it really felt like they were on track with making Paper Mario better, but just kind of fell short with the battle system, refusing to bring back proper RPG mechanics. So even with that, if that battle system as it is, if there were more reason to have fights other than just getting coins, I'd do it more often, but it is what it is. I'm going to say it's better than It's obviously better than Color Splash. I think it was better than Inside Story as well. Unfortunately, I have to leave this off on a negative tone because, another big disappointment was the sequel to Mario & Rabbids. They took everything that was good about that game and threw it in the bin. Now, we can have an argument of whether or not the free roaming mechanics were better or worse. But to me, the main problem was that it just wasn't fun. I didn't particularly like the free roam mechanics, although I have played other SRPGs that have done that. This one just doesn't do it well. And while I do appreciate that it gives you more freedom with your party than the first game did, it just was an unbalanced mess. Most of the battles were either too easy or just spiked. There were a couple interesting boss fights, but not to the level the first game was. The writing was trash, and they gave their Rabbids the ability to speak now, so it's just they completely changed their character for some reason. It not only made them annoying, but even already annoying, but then even more annoying because their dialogue was trash. And why did they need to give them the ability to speak? It's even weirder with the teen characters. I don't know, this was a huge disappointment for me, and while I gotta say, I'd rather play Sticker Star. At least that game didn't overstay it as much. Maybe the DLC for it is better, but I'm probably not gonna play it. Honestly, I kinda had to force myself to finish, this game, but oh well. Hopefully whatever comes next from the RPG series will be better. I would be open for another Mario & Rabbids game, but I highly doubt that's going to happen because not only did it not review particularly well, it flopped hard commercially. Of course, the original didn't do particularly well either, but they gave it a sequel. But considering Ubisoft came out and said they were disappointed with its sales, yeah, I think we're done with that. Maybe that's for the best. The first game was great, but the second game just leaves a real bad taste in your mouth. But I am hopeful to what we get in the future, even though the only thing we have coming is the remake for Thousand Year Door, which I'm hoping will be good, though I'll probably stick with the original because I'm not liking the fact that they dropped the frame rate to 30, and I'm not liking the new aesthetics, but we'll see, maybe it'll be better. Anyways, that's it for this list. I think by looking at it, the fact that we only have one bad game, and even that game's not unplayable or F tier bad, that the RPG series have always been great, or at least good. You can't go wrong with it, unless you play Paper Jam, I guess. But yeah, I fully recommend playing these games, or giving at least one games in each of the sub-series a try, because more than likely you'll probably fall in love with at least one. Anyways, that's it for now. I plan to do another Mario series tier list with Mario Kart with Ian again, and I'll probably do another one or two, depending on whether or not I want to split the main games from the other spin-offs that don't really fall on anything else. And oh yes, and of course the Mario Sports games, which I'll also be doing with Ian. Anyways, that's it for now.